So we are about to start our second panel, which I am very excited about. We have some of my favorite people joining us for digital literacy. So you heard more about the DQ concept from Dr. Park and what are the essential parts of digital citizenship. And when we're talking about the coronavirus crisis, we have a resurgence of fake news coming from all around the world. We are a lot more vulnerable now that we're leading completely digital lives. So I'm going to bring on some experts for you today that we can start to learn more fully what data is being used right now. What do we need to understand to fully grasp the situation that we're in? How do we equip ourselves with some of these essential skills to live through this unprecedented time in a safe and productive way? It's so incredibly important. So I think we should have our speakers in the green room. You can start bringing them on whenever you would like, guys. But to introduce to you, we're having my friend and colleague Dele Atanda joining us. He is the founder of the Internet Foundation and Made in Me, and also Mattia Night. So you guys really need to check this out. It's an incredible comic book series that really lands the plane about data rights and digital literacy and helps people that might not be as technical or technically proficient to understand this whole issue area, right? Then we also have my friend and colleague, Joe Toscano. He is the founder and chief visionary officer of the Beacon Trust Network. He is a former Googler that left due to ethical concerns and has been building ethical technology infrastructure and really become an activist in his own right ever since. He is also the author of Automating Humanity, an incredible book with some of the most mind-blowing imagery in it as well, if you haven't checked it out before. He's also a member of the World Economic Forum's Council for Data Protection. We also have Alex Burke joining us, who was one of the lead authors of the recent MIT report that was released, diving really deep into these issues around big data's use in the coronavirus crisis. She's a city science researcher at MIT Media Lab and is absolutely brilliant. She also used to work at Google specifically on the prevention of fake news and disinformation. So she has a lot to say specifically on that topic to help us understand the current environment that we're living in right now. I participated in an event a couple weeks ago with some fake news experts that have access to the whole Twitter fire hose. And they're seeing just on Twitter alone, sometimes up to 50,000 fake news stories coming out per day. Do we realize that a lot of this material that is being shared by even our friends or family or people in our networks has no basis in reality, has not been fact checked? We really need to start to be more aware of this situation if we're not already, and we can start to dive deep into those topics on this panel. So do we have Alex, Joe, and Dele ready to join us? You know, last time we brought one person up at a time to introduce themselves to everybody. That's what we're having at the beginning of each panel. So we give every speaker about 5 minutes to tell you about themselves and their work before we begin the panel discussion and debate. So if we can bring on one of our first speakers, that would be fantastic. Oh, I see Alex is typing she is here. If we can bring Alex Burke on stage, we should also have Joe and Dele in the back room. That would be wonderful.
Hi, I'm Dele. I'm founder and CEO of the Internet Foundation and Made in Me. We set up the Internet Foundation back in 2013 with essentially three mandates: establishing a universal declaration of digital rights as an extension of human rights, and creating an ethical data standard for how companies can responsibly use data in commerce. And this is now being codified in a standard we developed with the British Standard Institute for ethical data usage called BS 10102, which it gives guidance on big data usage in data-driven organizations. So, and then the third mandate that we have is really around empowering people to improve their lives with their data. Just going to make sure. All right, it's all looking good. Right, so in parallel, we then use Metame, which is our technology company, to build technologies that essentially give people tools and applications to be able to materialize those policies and standards that we develop within the Internet Foundation. And our primary innovation really is around a new type of data asset, which we call an MPOD. It's an acronym for Minimum Proprietary Data Store. And this is a new type of cryptographic data object that essentially enables three primary things. So the first is trusted data. So we use blockchain technologies to attest information and be able to assign levels of veracity or confidence in terms of information. The second aspect is this idea of trustless data sharing. And this is a popular theme in the blockchain community. On one hand, it means that we're able to share information with each other peer-to-peer without the need for trusted intermediaries, in a similar way that we do with cryptocurrencies, for example, where we don't need banks as intermediaries. Our platform enables a similar thing to happen with information. So in many ways, they say, you know, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies enable money to be transferred as easily as information. Well, MPODs enable information to be transferred as securely as money. And the other aspect, which is really important, trustless data sharing, is that we can encode these information objects with policies and rules that mean we don't have to trust the parties that we're sharing them with, because we can rely on the network and the information assets themselves to enforce rules on our behalf. And then the third aspect that's really important around this is around data pricing. So we have a framework where we're basically able to assign a risk and opportunity score to a data set based on the nature of the data, the nature of the entity that is seeking it, and the context in which it's going to be used. So, and all of this is fundamentally built around this principle that the data economy that we have now is broken. I think we all understand that. And effectively, we need a new data economy. We need a new data economic paradigm, which is based on transparency, where we're able to actually understand the risk and opportunity level associated with data sets, so we can determine how they're used safely. And when you think about it, today we only really measure data based on size, and size is perhaps the least relevant factor in this broadband 5G quantum digital age that we're entering around that. So with all of that, our vision is that we create a new data economy. We call this an economy of self, an economy of self-sovereignty, where we're free agents and where our data is used to empower and enrich us, and we have a healthy symbiotic relationship with society and with commerce in a mutual value exchange underpinned by ethical data standards, clean data principles in terms of marketplaces, and our vision is to enable 1 billion self-sovereign citizens by 2030, in line with other SDG goals to this end. So, I mean, that's all sort of somewhat high level. Let me talk about some specific use cases around how we actually enable this. So the first, we have an app that we built called Quantifile. So effectively, you can think about the Internet Foundation as a network, Metame as a platform, and then we basically deliver apps on top of that platform that achieve specific goals. So Quantifile is a quantified self app that we basically pivoted to COVID, and we're essentially enabling self-monitoring of COVID symptoms using a camera, using a cell phone camera, and that's a really important part of this. So we're able to measure oxygen saturation level, heart rate variability, respiration rate, and then pull in things like temperature from third-party devices, location from the phone, and other factors. And then we package these into specific different MPODs that we empower people to be able to share with third parties in a way that they have full control over, and to be able to provide the right degrees of anonymization or identification according to the context in which they're being used. So really excited about being able to use this to deliver a healthy data set to the COVID response efforts around the world, and using our network to underpin privacy around that. And then the last use case, which really kind of talks to specifically to digital intelligence and digital education, as Brittany alluded to, is our comic project, which Meta Knights is this world's first crypto comic. And, you know, it's a story about this dual physical digital world that's overrun by a clan of cyber vampires called Fangs, who suck people's data to enslave them in the digital world so that they can rule them in the physical world. So that's essentially the story content, but we're using it to actually deliver some really key crypto technologies. So self-sovereign identity, there's a crypto media wallet where you can actually have other crypto assets. We're introducing this concept of crypto comics as crypto collectibles, and having a wallet where people can actually collect, earn money and data assets within this wallet. So really using it to drive a whole wave of crypto literacy and digital literacy. And we're working with Dr. Park and the DQ Institute to actually use it as part of this process for driving digital literacy, particularly around younger generation Zs and the like. So very excited to be here today, and very excited to get into the subject matter.
Thank you so much for being here. Love you and your work. So excited for this conversation. Let's kick it over to Joe to introduce a little bit more about his work.
All right. Hey, everyone. First, I just want to say thanks, Brittany, for inviting me to the Own Your Data inaugural.
Yes. Rocking it.
That's great. Yeah, no, this is awesome. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Joe Toscano. As Brittany mentioned, I am a former consultant for Google. I'm an experienced designer by trade, and that kind of is the core of where all of my conversation points will come from. My work is less on the deep technical engineering side and more on the consumer experience of privacy, data rights, manipulation across the internet, all those kinds of things, the behavioral psychology behind it and whatnot. So as Brittany mentioned, since leaving Google, I wrote a book called Automating Humanity, which you can see right here. The purpose of this book, so I'm from Nebraska, and I saw a really big divide being out in the Valley to the extent to, for example, like 2017, I came home to teach a class at the University of Nebraska, came home, went and got lunch, and when I got lunch, I paid with Apple Pay, which in San Francisco is just standard everyday thing. In Nebraska, when I did that, they thought I was stealing because they didn't see the transaction go through. They had never used the technology before. They had it, but they had never had anyone use it. I was the first one to tap my phone, grab my food, and walk away. And they were like, wait, you didn't pay. That's just a small example, but what I was seeing back then was a need to bring digital literacy to the masses. That's the only way I believe we will transition effectively. So this book, the purpose of it is to explain what's going on, how did we get here, what can we do about it, and to do it in a way that the general public can pick up, right? Because if you are on this call and you're a technical expert, you've read a lot of technology books, you know how dense they can be, literally sometimes like full doorstops. So this is a lot of imagery, for example, like I'll show you some. And the purpose of some of this stuff is just to explain like, you know, how we're getting taken into technology and how it's starting to take advantage of us, how companies like Facebook are treating us like test subjects and explaining the situation and the relationship between our technology. How Google is sucking the data out of us every single day and how we don't have much control. The purpose of this book, like I said, is to illustrate these issues because some of them are so intangible that it's hard to just write about, especially to people who don't have the literacy level to even understand some of the expert words that we use, if you will. So that was a big mission for me, and a big part of my work is to bring technology literacy to the masses. Beyond this book, I used that as a platform to create a company called Beacon, which stands for the Better Ethics and Consumer Outcomes Network. You can find us at beacontrustnetwork.com. The purpose of Beacon is to help identify these issues proactively and to figure out how they become business value through improved consumer outcomes. Because while I do believe in enhanced regulation, that's part of my friendship and work with Brittany, that's part of my work outside of just this and with the World Economic Forum, I do believe in it. I believe the fastest way to make change is if we can figure out how it becomes a business value and to drive change on the revenue lines. So that's what we do a lot there, and our biggest focus is on privacy. And we're currently developing a software solution that will redesign the way that we give consent to companies and have access to control and understand how our data is being used. But yeah, outside of that, I don't have a slideshow. I'm not going to take too much time. I'm really looking forward to the questions and to see what everyone's thinking. So that's a little bit about me, and looking forward to talking to everyone.
Thank you, Joe. So great to have you here today. Do we have Alex as well ready to come on? I know she has a couple slides to present to all of us as well. So if we could give her one or two windows, that would be fantastic. So she can talk about more of the incredible work that's going on at MIT Media Lab on these topics of data privacy in times of crisis. She has really been on the front lines of this and published the first report on the subject. So I'm really, really excited to dig in deeper into the work that her and her colleagues have been doing and what they have found. We're also going to talk deeper about the types of data that are being used in some of these coronavirus prevention projects. And there we go. We've got Alex.
Hello,
Welcome.
how are you? Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here, and thank you for everything that you've been doing. So please let all of our participants know a bit more about you and your work.
Sure. First, I'm going to ask you all behind the scenes to give me a screen to share some of the slides I put together for you all. I know that there's a limit to screens, and so I need one more.
Perfect.
Yes. Thank you. If Chris could help us out with that.
Would be great.
I think it's going to require someone to drop off for just a moment while I'm sharing the slides. That's what it looks like on my end.
Feel free to kick me off or whatever's easiest. All good.
Joe, can I ask you to
5 minutes?
Okay, great. I'm going to take one, and here we are. So to tell you a bit about myself, I hope that you can all see my screen right now. I'm Alex. I'm a researcher in the City Science Group at the MIT Media Lab. And this year, my research has focused on private location data collected by mobile devices, which is commonly used for private profit, and how this data can be used for the public good, but in a privacy-preserving way. And come the recent health crisis, this work has transformed into COVID-19 related research, which I'm going to talk to you all about. In particular, how we're using location data to both understand social distancing, human mobility, and behavioral changes, as well as how we can do privacy-preserving contact tracing. And I just want to check in. Is everyone able to see my presentation okay? And hear me all right? Great. I'm going to continue on. And I've put together a lot of material for you all. And Brittany, I really want you to cut me off when it's up, because I want you all to understand contact tracing and how the technology works. But I can go into as much detail or not as this audience wants.
Yeah, go for it. Let's inform these guys.
All right. So first off, what do we even mean when we're talking about location data? I'm going to go through this really quickly. So call detail records, or CDRs, have been collected by telecoms for years. And this is lower precision location data. It records locations based on where a phone connected to cell towers. And then we have GPS coordinates, which are collected by various applications on mobile devices, and they're much higher precision. And this type of data is collected by various apps for their particular purposes, or might be collected in the background while you're not using an app. And what you might not realize is that there's this lucrative location-based services industry where companies embed their software development kits, SDKs, in these various apps. So they have the ability to create a more aggregate view of all the different places people went and were, regardless of which applications they were using when this data was collected. And this is really useful for private companies to serve more targeted ads or better analytics. But it can also be really useful for the public good in terms of understanding population mobility, especially in times of crisis. And there's even more precise location data available through Bluetooth. But what Bluetooth gives us isn't exactly location data. Bluetooth, it can indicate proximity of another device, which is still really useful. It can be used by companies to understand where a user went in a store, and it can also be used for contact tracing. So just to give you a little more information on what my colleagues and I have been doing at the MIT Media Lab with location data, we've been using location data to measure social distancing across geographic regions and demographics. And we can measure changes in how much and how far people travel, which is what we're showing in these maps for New York. And I'm going to fly through this to get to contact tracing, but I'm really happy to speak more to this. And also using GPS location data, we can measure the relative frequency and the places where people come into contact, which is really what's relevant for, preventing the spread of COVID-19. And we can see who these people were that came into contact. But as we do so, there are some really important privacy considerations, such as how data is safely aggregated and which places are safe to study and which demographics are safe to observe. So what I really want to talk to you today is contact tracing. And if you don't already know, contact tracing is the process of identifying people who may have come into contact with persons who were positively tested as infected. And effective contact tracing can help governments and communities better target quarantines to mitigate the economic impacts of asking everyone to stay at home. Or it can help better use limited testing resources, or help target serology testing and quicken the return of a workforce. And technology used to collect location data can help scale this process. And we've already seen some governments effectively use contact tracing to contain COVID-19. But these examples are centralized. They don't necessarily respect individual privacy in terms of how they use data or publish data. And some of them restrict individual freedoms with little transparency to how they work. But there are many more projects in development that are focused on more decentralized and privacy-sensitive designs. And there are also notable research proposals that would increase the privacy and security guarantees for these efforts. I would be really happy to speak to how these technologies work and how clever uses of protocols and cryptography improve privacy and security if there's time for it. I also want to note that these projects intend to collaborate on shared protocols so that even as they develop separate mobile applications, information about infection status and therefore exposure risk can be shared across users of these different systems. And how infection information is shared and how risk level is expressed to users can then be specific to the application. Many of these projects are using Bluetooth in order to better preserve privacy. And using Bluetooth to create effective contact tracing systems was previously believed to be difficult due to compatibility issues between Google Android and Apple iOS devices, and some iOS limitations on allowing the continuous use of Bluetooth due to privacy. However, this changed last week with a joint announcement by Apple and Google about their new privacy and security sensitive solutions to enable application developers to use their Bluetooth technology for contact tracing and to improve the interoperability between Android and iOS devices. And their draft Bluetooth and cryptography specifications are in line with what recent privacy preserving research proposals like PACT from MIT were proposing. And there's good reason now to believe that Bluetooth will become the preferred method to detect whether individuals come in close enough contact to transmit the disease. But this will be used in combination with location history. So as these various contact tracing efforts have a range of implementation differences and trade-offs in terms of what type of data is used, whether it's location data such as Bluetooth or, such as GPS versus co-locations detected by Bluetooth, and whether they're centralized versus decentralized, how positive test cases are reported, that is whether they're allowing self-reported symptoms and cases or whether they only allow reported cases from trusted health agencies. and the experience for users who may have been exposed. And all these differences lead to different trade-offs between accuracy, adoption, which is important to have an impact, usefulness to individuals and public health authorities, and privacy. And all of the existing applications and research assume that individuals with COVID positive test results must give up some privacy when reporting their data. However, the amount of privacy they give up and whether it is only to a trusted authority or also other system users varies by the implementation method. And some of the recent research has been about how to make this data even more private. So I have put together a ton of material about how what these different implementation methods are and their various trade-offs. But I want to check in with Brittany about timing, because I would love to dive into the details about this, but also want to respect everyone's time and what you have in store for everyone.
Absolutely. I think while you have control of that screen, if you wanted to run people through it real quick, just as a top line, 1,000-foot level information, and then we'll bring Dele back and put his face where your slides are. So if you want to do that quickly, just while we have that space,
sure,
then we'll go into the panel. No problem at all.
Sure. So about the data being used, when we're doing contact tracing, we might use location history data like time stamped GPS points or Bluetooth proximity data. And the way this works with location data is that someone's exposure risk can be estimated by detecting whether their mobile device reported a geolocation near an infected person's at about the same time and for how long they were in that place together. The co-location data collected by Bluetooth is different in that it reports whether two people were in the same place without geographic location. In this case, apps installed on people's devices use the Bluetooth Low Energy protocol to broadcast random IDs and listen for IDs broadcast from other devices. And each app records information about their broadcast IDs and received IDs. And an app might also record metadata, such as the time and location where a message was broadcast or received. And since the Bluetooth signals are low range, the apps can only exchange IDs when the devices come in close proximity of one another, making it a good proxy for whether users came in close enough contact to transmit disease. And then users who later report to be infected can share information about the IDs their app broadcast or received, depending on the implementation. And then exposure risk for other users can be assessed by whether their app exchanged IDs with infected users' apps. And one of the nice benefits of using Bluetooth for more targeted contact tracing in this way over location data is that it can allow a system to better preserve privacy. Location histories, even when they're anonymized, they can reveal private and sensitive information about people, even when it's anonymized, because statistical methods can be used to reconstruct location histories and re-identify people. And the approach with Bluetooth mitigates privacy risks by detecting when people come in close contact without location histories. And the random IDs broadcast by devices can change often, making it difficult to track people between the places they go. But still, tracking will be possible, and there's no perfect solution to this privacy problem, and I'm happy to go into why. And also talk about some of the nice ways that people are trying to improve upon that.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that.
Okay.
I hope that was really helpful for all of our participants. We're going to go into the panel discussion now, and I hope that landed the plane a little bit on the types of data that are being used, how it's being used, and how we need to understand whether our privacy is being protected or not, because we're seeing a proliferation of news stories every single day of different governments and multinational corporations that are gaining data access to build new tools to prevent the spread of the virus. And I think we're all on board for saving human life. We all believe in data science and AI and its ability to empower us to change the world for the better. But we need to make sure we're protecting our fundamental rights and freedoms. So the first question that I really want all of you guys to answer is, in terms of digital literacy during times of crisis, what do you think are some of the most important and fundamental competencies that people should have, whether it's from media literacy or an understanding of how to protect certain data sets? What do you think is a tangible takeaway for people that you can leave them with, of something that's important to you and a way to take action on that in their daily lives now? Who wants to?
Alex, go ahead.
Great, please.
Yeah, sure. I think that I really want people to understand what location histories mean, and that even as companies tell you that data is de-identified or anonymized, that it's always possible to reconstruct these location histories. And once you give up your privacy, it's going to be hard to claw back. So as we're considering these times of crisis, it's really going to come to us as a society to decide whether, to weigh our personal privacy against what's better for the public good. For example, people might share their location histories to improve contact tracing and help other people get the help they need more quickly. And that might be what we decide is really important at this time. But people just need enough information about how data is collected and shared to be able to make those decisions with more knowledge.
I'm going to weigh in and say that I separated them out into media literacy, data literacy separately. Obviously, there's big differences there, but I think media literacy is fundamentally the most important thing here, because if we can't tell truth from fiction, we can't determine what the data literate aspects are we need to be aware of. And I think media literacy is a huge challenge across the nation right now. And then there's those of us who are privileged enough to have data literacy, where it's a whole nother level of conversation. And at that point, Alex, I 100% agree with you. The location data aspect of it is huge. I think also something that I would like everyone to walk away with is take with you and understand, like, what are the governments doing with it? Yes, but also what are their plans to do with it after this is all over? Are they going to continue to keep this alive, or are they going to shut things down and let go of those data points? Are they going to get rid of that history? They're going to keep it? Is it going to be able to continually be used afterwards? I see here in the comments somebody mentioned the Patriot Act. I was actually going to bring that up. That was our way in to mass surveillance, and it never got turned off, despite the fact that we are now almost 20 years past that. So, what is the access rights? What are the purpose limitations? What's the time limitations on these things? And how is that being used? Because to be honest with you, I believe we do need technology to help surveil and keep track of these things. But if it were done properly, I would opt in 100%. It's for public good. But is actually being done well or not, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I would, there are two things that I would want people to take away as two primary things. I think I'm actually between Joe and Alex in that regard, without being the diplomat. But I think one of the first things for me is to understand the difference between identity and identifiability. And, this word identity is bandied around a lot, but the reality is that identity is something really subjective. You really think about it, right? It's like, what's your nationality? What's your kinship? What do you believe in? Are you a Republican? Are you a Democrat? Are you a Christian? Are you a Muslim? These are the things that make our identity, and they're very subjective and they're very internally defined. Identifiability, on the other hand, is really objective, and that's to Alex's point. You can be identified by the places that you go. Location data, you'd look at a piece of location data and say, it's just where I've been. That's not who I am, but it does allow you to be identified. And I think that this is one of the mischiefs that's made in the space, where we talk about identity like it's something objective, a social security number, a name, a phone number, something objective, but it's not. It's actually something subjective. Whereas the things that are objective, our location, the way we walk, who we meet with, how we share posts, what apps we have on our phone, are actually really objective. And those really identify who we are. So I think this is one of the first things we need to understand, in the sense that, I often liken it to the whole thing about PII and anonymization. The principle is that it's like, I take a picture of you, Brittany, and this is Brittany Kaiser. She lives here. This is her phone number, and this is her age. And I say, okay, you know what? I'm going to remove all of that data, and suddenly that picture's anonymous. Stupid, right? It's kind of nonsensical. And that's what's played around this whole thing with anonymity. So I think that's the first thing that I'd like people to understand. And then the second thing is, I think that the word of the day is and. It's not or. We're often forced into these false choices, like around privacy versus the public good. And that's the powers that be have orchestrated this narrative for a very long time, but it's a false narrative. We can have both. We can have privacy and still enable the public good. So I think that's what we need to push our creative and innovation processes towards, to having the best of all worlds, not being forced to make a false choice.
I completely agree that there's a false dichotomy there. And that's where a lot of the research about privacy preserving contact tracing comes in. When we first saw contact tracing come out with these new apps, it was using this false dichotomy to, assume that in order to do this effectively, we have to strip people of their privacy rights and individual freedoms. But we can use technology and math and cryptography in effective ways to do a lot better than that. And that's where the current research and projects are going.
On one last note on narrative too, I would suggest everyone to watch out for the way that this is framed, right? We, I think, are headed into a world of the war on disease, similar to how we had the war on drugs, the war on terrorism. The next wave that we're going to be seeing from our politicians is the war on disease, in order to increase surveillance and control society. So just watch that one develop out.
Absolutely. I think probably a lot of people on here may have caught some of the Human Rights Foundation conference the other day about how tyranny can take advantage of crisis situations. And that's originally what was really my call to arms, so to say, to gather all of you guys here so quickly. And put this together in a very short period of time, because I saw emergency legislation getting passed, countries around the world all of a sudden getting access to data sets that their legislators had decided would need explicit consent, and now they just have access and are using them in a way that is not transparent. So I think during this period of time, I would really love to equip as many people that are participating in this with very tangible tools. I mean, how can people really learn what is going on and how they can protect themselves? I know, some of you have been publishing reports, doing activist work, and where would you send people to learn more about how they can protect themselves, how they can engage, and how they can do something, be involved in a positive way while understanding what's going on?
Well, I'll just put it out there that a lot of the contact tracing apps, the new projects that are open source, they are very open about how they work. And they're really pushing the Apple and Google, who now have to be in this space as well, towards these more privacy preserving mechanisms. So I really encourage people, before you install these apps, read about how they work and know how they work, and keep these bigger companies accountable, because at the end of the day, they are the ones that are going to hold access to your data. And we're going to need regulation probably to make sure that data is responsibly deleted after it's no longer needed. So I encourage everyone to just be aware of how the apps that you're using work and how they collect your location data and how they guarantee that they will be properly dealt with once it's no longer necessary.
Absolutely. And I would love to now kick it over to Joe on this, who really is an expert in how we can make terms and conditions more ethical and transparent. I mean, I don't know how many people that are participating right now have recently read the terms and conditions of any of the apps you use. Anybody? I mean, I spent nearly a decade in law school and I don't read them every single time. I tell people every day to read terms and conditions, and I still don't do it every time. So this is a fundamental part about digital literacy. Do you know what you're agreeing to? Do you know what's being collected about you? by whom, what it's being used for. So Joe, maybe you can talk through some of those concepts a little bit for people so that they understand how important this part of the really legal agreement that most people don't really engage with.
Yeah, I would like to take a second just to also say, if anyone didn't notice, there was a pause when Brittany first asked the question between all three of us. I think that was a symptom of we don't all have really a great answer to this. And Alex's was probably about as close as we're going to get, which is you need to read the terms of services. But ultimately, that's as much as I agree, that's not an option. It's really not an option at this point in history. It doesn't tell you much right now, even if you can comprehend it, which the large majority of the world cannot. So some stuff that we've been proposing in our legislative discussions is, one, a data transparency declaration, where companies have to explicitly list how many highly sensitive data points they are collecting or personally identifiable, right? It depends on jurisdiction you're in. How many of those data points are being shared with partners, and how many of those partners have had a major data breach within the last 3 years. Things like that, how long they can hold your data for, whether they can create new partnerships or not. And make this in a simple summary, similar to like when you get a new credit card and it tells you up front, here's a one-page statement that says, here's your balance transfer rates, here's your cash advance rates, here's your interest rate for this year, or a nutrition label as well. There's a lot of comparisons to our work in like a nutrition label. So I think that's one basic step. That's not perfect by any means, but it's taking something that is currently completely incomprehensible to 80+% of the world and making it simplified enough to give people some text. Something else we've been pushing is Prohibited Use Act. I think that there needs to be a legal mandate telling companies to explicitly state what they will not use the data for, right? Because they can tell me, oh, we're going to help you use your location data from point A to point B. Great. That doesn't say we won't use it for X or Y, right? It just says we will for sure be using it for this. But I think that these companies need to have a prohibited use policy that says we absolutely will never use the data for X, Y, and Z purposes. And I think that those need to have legal repercussions. There should be a legal mandate that says if companies cross their own self-defined line, they will get fined X amount, or there's some kind of punishment. Maybe that's as high as like 10 of their revenue or something larger. Who knows? Something seriously detrimental to a company to where they're allowed to set their own bounds. Those bounds then get checked by the government to prove that it is stiff enough. You know, it's not just watered down. And then they have financial repercussions if they don't follow through on their own word, or we can sue them independently. Those are things we're working out still, but those are a couple concepts we've been pushing to help make it more transparent. Because when you do, like, for example, GDPR, CCPA, other regulations that are coming out, I do holistically believe people should have the right to know all the data points, what's being collected, how it's used, where it's being shared. They should have a list to know all of the third-party partners. But if you get into the weeds on this stuff and you really do the research, you'll understand that for the average consumer, that's a broken system in and of itself, right? If you go on a PayPal's website, they'll show you all the third parties they're connected to, and you will have a page that is 10 times as long as the current legal agreement, because they have hundreds of partners that you have to scan through and read about and understand where the data is going. Same with, you want to know all the data points Google's collecting, where it's going? See you tomorrow, maybe see you next week with how long that is. So we need to figure out a way to make this consumer accessible. It's not going to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect. But we need to have options that give people context, because really that's what they're lacking is context, right? And I think that's the first step towards creating digital literacy, data literacy, is giving people context. And once they have context, then they can start to dive into the weeds a bit more long term.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to kick it over to Dele, who really led on the drafting of the British data protection standards. And you can hopefully frame a little bit more for us what the responsibility of entities who collect our data, especially in times of crisis, what that should look like.
Yeah, I mean, okay, great, thank you. Where do I start? I will say I pause because the magnitude of the question.
Right.
And I mean, the simple answer for me would be to say, go download MetaMe, because that's essentially what we're building and trying to provide and enable. But I think it comes down to that there are a couple of aspects here. I think I agree. I mean, the reality we are probably the most privacy. We're in that 0.001% of privacy professionals, and the reality is we don't read terms and conditions. And so it's ridiculous, really, to expect that most people are going to. And I don't think that that is a viable solution. I think that in many ways, the terms and conditions are structured to prevent people from reading them, to prevent them from being accessible. And I think that we have to remove the cognitive burden from people and put it on corporations. It should be the other way around. Companies should have to, it should be very simple for us to understand. You know, if I go and buy a car, I don't need to understand the nuances of the braking policy or the airbag policy that has been enforced. The car manufacturer has to comply with all of those. So I think that it's really on the legal front, we need legislative frameworks, and we're getting there. You know, GDPR obviously has been a complete reset of the data economy, and it has flaws, absolutely. But CCPA is going even further than GDPR. You know, introducing things like a do not sell bill, you know, a data dividend, and then, you know, a mandate that companies actually quantify the value of data that people actually have. These are material, dramatic changes, and you know, obviously, you know, Brittany and I have been working with Senator Thomas in his roundtable on the New York Privacy Act, which may go further than CCPA. So there will be this cat and mouse, but I think the process has begun from a regulatory perspective of moving in that direction. Second thing, then, I think following that is the technology. I don't think that we don't have to, and this is the power of the new state of the art in the technical world. We don't have to rely on the good nature of companies anymore to enforce these rules. We can use the state-of-the-art technologies, blockchain, AI, distributed ledgers to enforce these rules. So this is the importance of having laws and standards in place, because once we have those, we can codify those rules into the technology. Now, will it be foolproof? Of course not. But I mean, it's even if we're 20% better than the current landscape, that would be dramatic. And I would argue that we could be 80% better than the current landscape. And there will be outliers that will refine and improve over time. So I think the technology has a massive. This is the technologies. If you look through history, technology really plays the role of liberating the common man, giving the common man more power, but it gets hijacked. But this is a general trend. So the technology is not our enemy. The technology is our friend. I would even argue the virus is not our enemy. The virus is resetting and giving us an opportunity to reset the narrative around the technology and around our data and around a lot of these things in many ways. So we should take that as a friend as well. And then the last point I just want to make on this is down to the UX. And I think this is really a critical thing. You know, in our protocol, we basically create these data objects, and they basically have, from a consumer perspective, you only need to understand two things about them. They've got a red, amber, green status in terms of how identifiable they make you, a piece of information that is used by an entity. Does it make you, if it's green, you can't be identified. If it's yellow or amber, you can be identified. If it's red, it has confidential information in it. So you should be very careful about how you use it. And then the second factor is it has a sensitivity score. So out of 10, is this information, you know, is it my favorite shows on Netflix? It's probably got sensitivity of 2, right? If it's whether I tested COVID positive or not, and my location and where my son goes to school, then it's got a sensitivity score of 9 or 10 in that regard. So having this framework that people can use to engage with data, that's what we've designed into our protocol and framework. And I think these kind of simplistic ways, and then having contracts that back that up, using smart contracts and the like to back that up, so that it's very easy for people, I think that's the way forward.
Thank you so much. So we only have a couple minutes left, so I'd love for each of you guys just to give a quick concluding statement. I wanted to let you know that the most upvoted question right now specifically says that since each country's priority is so different, some value privacy and human rights while others don't. How can we help enforce a global digital literacy standard worldwide? So if you could just address that quickly, and we've got to head off in about 3 minutes. So please keep it short, guys. Thank you.
I'll get going just to start it off. I think this is exactly for us. Human rights are our North Star. Human rights are effectively global citizenship rights. They are inalienable. They are non-negotiable. Everyone is entitled to them. So that's where we start from, and we draw standards based on universal, global, digital, human citizenship rights. So for us, I think that's a very straightforward perspective in terms of doing that.
Thank you.
I think
Go ahead.
I think that there's a huge cultural difference that we need to acknowledge. In some cultures and societies, there might be a bigger emphasis on the greater good and the public good versus individual rights and freedoms. For example, if we were to have a contact tracing app in the US or in Europe, in order to make adoption large scale enough that it could actually be effective, privacy would be a feature of that application, because people would only install it and use it if they thought that privacy was going to be guaranteed, versus in other governments where in other places, the government is able to say, hey, you have to install this, otherwise you're not going to be able to get around the country, or people are going to do it for the greater good because that is more common in their society. So I think that we have to acknowledge that there are these cultural differences across the globe, and who we're designing for and how we're designing this trade-off between mass adoption and privacy and usefulness to individuals versus governments will have to vary between these places. And what it comes down to is people really understanding how these technologies work and how data is collected and used so that they can make informed decisions or let the government do it for them.
Thank you, Alex. And Joe, final remarks, please.
Yeah, I was going to say something very similar. When I first started getting into this, I tried to go global and try to be everywhere and do everything, because at Google, you're thinking globally. But one thing I learned at Google is if it's good for everyone, it's great for nobody. And so we need to really consider what are the global foundations we want to set, what are the idealisms that we want to have at a global level. But also we have to realize that the best way to actually bring these to life is to have action on the ground at the local level. And so I am asking all of you to get involved in your communities locally. And if you have other communities around you who may be less data literate, for example, I'm back home right now in Nebraska because I really love living in Nebraska full time, but because we need leaders to come home, to go home to the places where they're from, and to help those places that are not the big tech bubbles, help them move forward and help them bridge the gap, teach them how their kids can get a job in the future, what they need to go to school for, how they have stability in their lives, and how this all affects that. And I think once we do that, we build better communities. We start to have societies align again. And it starts with having global ideals, but actionable, tactical work at the local level.
Thank you so much for that, Joe. And thanks so much to the three of you for all of the incredible work that you do, for your research, for building actionable tools that we can actually use to enforce our privacy and data rights, and for your activism and passion. Really, thank you guys for being here. If there's anything you didn't get the chance to say, please submit it to us in writing so we can include it in the report.